Since the dawn of competitive sports, there's always been something uniquely powerful about a rivalry that pushes its adherents to greater degrees of creativity and performance. And perhaps in no art like the violent art of pugilism does the psychological phenomenon of a rivalry create such a compelling spectacle. In recent times, very few conflicts in boxing have bristled more than that of Saul, Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin, two middleweight powerhouses from opposing continents, and who, for a better part of a decade, have failed to settle their differences in the ring. For one man, it's a pursuit for justice, where controversies both in and out of the ring have prevented him from receiving at least one deserved victory.
It is officially a draw.
And for the other, an opportunity to finally close the book on a tainted chapter that maligns the middle portion of his career. This September, exactly 5 years on from their initial meeting, the fiery Mexican and the thunderous Kazakh will settle the debate with a signature mix of skill and ferocity to conclude one of the most fascinating rivalries in recent times. This is the story of Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin. As a new era of middleweights creep in, there's no denying that for a long time, Golovkin and Canelo shared the stage as the premier middleweight names. But despite their mirrored presence, their ascension to the top of the sport could not have been more different.
The undefeated Saul Canelo Alvarez.
Canelo Alvarez, as a red-haired, freckle-faced teen, offered a peculiar product when he emerged from the gyms of Guadalajara in Mexico. Birthed from a nation rich in boxing heritage, his unique but striking appearance gave him immediate star potential for promoters and TV networks to exploit. And combined with the most important facet of all, the ability to fight, Canelo was soon unveiled to mainstream audiences when he featured on the undercard of Floyd Mayweather versus Shane Mosley.
Maybe we have seen a piece of the future.
That was great stuff.
A prospect with a capital P.
Yep. Won't be the last time we see him.
What then developed was a meteoric rise to the top of the sport, becoming a world champion less than a year later, and a genuine box office draw when more titles at super welterweight and middleweight were picked up.
The better of him in every way right now.
And new middleweight champion of the world.
Conversely, Gennady Golovkin faced a far more challenging route, and the prospects of him becoming a similar boxing star were far more bleak.
Aus Hamburg, Spotlight Boxing Team Gennady Golovkin.
When the 2000s came to a close, he was already 28 years of age, spoke no English, and yet to even fight on American TV. Despite a successful amateur career, his prime years as a professional were spent in Germany, playing second fiddle to local fan favorites. The promotional limbo eventually came to an end in 2010 when he signed with K2 Promotions, who for the next 2 years campaigned hard to get him a US TV deal. And armed with only a mythical knockout reputation, the Kazakh brawler finally got his breakthrough in September 2012 when the premium American TV channel HBO took a chance on him.
Good left hand to the body and left to the head. Down goes Proxla.
Golovkin repaid HBO's faith in him by obliterating Grzegorz Proxla in just 5 rounds.
Oh, right hand hurt Proxla. Golovkin steps in and down he goes again.
He was no match for Gennady Golovkin. Oh my goodness.
The reputation of him being boxing's most dangerous man was now verified. Elite fighters of the division voluntarily stayed clear of Golovkin's destructive path that left behind 12 consecutive knockout victims.
Oh my goodness, that's not normal. What we just saw was not ordinary, it was extraordinary. That kind of punching power.
His terrifying middleweight reign led to him swooping the WBA, IBF and WBC world titles. By 2015, Golovkin had become the fan-favourite pay-per-view superstar that just 4 years prior seemed a distant fantasy. But despite being recognised by most observers as the best fighter in the division, Golovkin was still missing that marquee win to elevate him to higher levels.
Middleweight championship.
From promotional stablemates such as Felix Sturm to the much-heralded Sergio Martinez, it became a customary practice to avoid facing the Kazakh power puncher.
Gennady Golovkin is sitting here ringside. Do you have interest in that fight?
With each avoidance, there developed Golovkin's cult hero status amongst fans, who were always on hand to deliver fresh criticism towards his evading foes. Their harshest of criticisms, however, would only be reserved for one Saul Canelo Alvarez, who in 2015 came to occupy the #1 position in the Ring magazine's rankings when he defeated Miguel Cotto for the WBC middleweight title.
And new middleweight champion of the world.
Up until then, with the use of catchweight fights, Canelo had long delayed his full entry to the middleweight division. Even his first title win at the weight came against a career welterweight. And his most ardent of critics began mounting pressure on him to finally fight someone of equal stature.
I think it's time now where Canelo needs to step in with Triple G because everyone's been waiting for that fight.
Such were the frustrations from boxing observers that even the trainer of Canelo's knockout victim, Amir Khan, felt the time was right for the Mexican to pursue his toughest test.
Now it's time for him to take the risk and quit hiding behind little stuff, okay? Quit hiding behind the flag and fight Triple G.
Golovkin, who occupied the WBA and IBF world titles, had also become the mandatory challenger for Canelo's WBC world title, and was intent on securing that shot to further expand his control of the middleweight belts.
My goal is all the belts in the middle division. Just I want unification fight. I need my last belt.
Canelo, however, refused to be dictated to, and chose instead to vacate his WBC middleweight title, thus delaying the Golovkin matchup even further. The public saw this as an act of evading the most dangerous man in the division, but from Canelo's perspective, it was a move to stage the fight on his terms.
Triple G, you invited him to the ring? Why?
I invited him into the ring, and like we say in Mexico, we don't fuck around.
1 year later, the stars aligned and the fight was finally announced.
Triple G, is there anything you'd like to tell Canelo?
Good luck in September.
La suerte es para los mediocres, my friend.
The Canelo vs Golovkin feud that we know of today may well be marred by bitterness and genuine animosity. But in the lead up to their first fight, the rivalry was fueled purely by the professional desire to be recognized as the best.
These two dynamic power punchers, both of them with tremendous records, getting ready to go into the ring against each other in September.
So it then served as a testament to the quality of the matchup, that their first fight generated the hype it did purely on the unique selling points of both individuals. For one, a highly venerated star looking to become the next Mexican great. And the other, the unlikeliest of sporting heroes from a war-torn corner of the world. Together, they merged to create the highlight event of 2017, packing out the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas to create one of the most hotly disputed results in recent times.
Many of history's greatest fighters have worn the crown of this division. Both of these guys know the history of the sport. They want to follow in that line of succession. And here we go.
The fighters, for their part, lived up to the billing with an entertaining, spirited performance over the course of 12 rounds. And for a moment, the entire boxing world braced itself for a decision in favor of Gennady Golovkin, who put forth a controlled, dominant display of boxing to finally earn that coveted scalp his career merited.
Okay, Jim, I've got a 116, 112, 8 rounds to 4, Gennady Golovkin.
But, as is often the case with the sport, a tremendous feat is never too far away from meeting disappointment.
Adelaide Bird scores it 118 to 110 for Canelo.
A bizarre scorecard heavily in favor of Canelo Alvarez would tip the scales away from Golovkin to result in a bitterly disappointing draw.
A three-way split. This is officially a draw.
The career-defining victory that the Kazakh had long been pursuing was snatched from him in the cruelest of ways.
118, 110 for Canelo? No, that did not happen. That is fiction, unfortunately.
Maximum 3-4 rounds I give him. Okay, it's correct. Not 50-50, not 6-6. He understands, he lost.
Whatever the disadvantages that Gennady Golovkin experienced early in his career, suddenly became minuscule compared to the controversial draw.
I thought that one of the judges had her card filled out before she came to the fight.
A lot of people are not understanding 118, 110, just like myself.
If it wasn't already clear that the Kazakh was a victim of the system, it suddenly was now. And his ardent supporters were given further ammunition to place Canelo under scrutiny, despite the officiating being entirely out of his control.
Do you want a rematch, Canelo?
Si la gente lo quiere, hacemos la revancha.
If the people want it, yes.
The Mexican responded the only way possible, and that was to immediately order the rematch to put everything right. The second fight was soon announced for May of 2018.
The rematch the world has been waiting for is Triple G versus Canelo.
So let's get this party started!
But 2 months before the engagement, emerged another twist in the saga that would further exasperate a rivalry that was becoming darker and more resentful by the day.
Canelo Alvarez failed a drug test before his big Triple G fight.
Alvarez has traces of the banned drug clenbuterol, a voluntary test has showed.
Having tested positive for a banned substance, Canelo was subsequently slapped with a 6-month suspension from the sport.
Y la verdad que esto me puede mucho. Desafortunadamente la pelea, la revancha tendrá que esperar.
There's a lot more animosity. Does him testing positive with clenbuterol added to maybe your disdain for him as a fighter?
Of course, because I'm true, I speak true.
You don't believe the story behind it?
No, sorry, I'm a smart guy.
Golovkin's scorning assessment of the Mexican's privilege in the sport was further reinforced. But whatever the ethical components surrounding Canelo's failed drug test, the overwhelming need to stage a second fight was too strong to resist. And after an intense back-and-forth negotiating period, the two parties eventually settled for a September date.
What once was a civil business partnership is now a blood feud. What once was the classic matchup between an attacking puncher and a skilled counterpuncher is a potential war of the worlds between two fighters who have far more at stake than they once would have anticipated.
The cordiality and mutual respect that marked the build-up to their first encounter had now been replaced by bitter discord. And though Canelo remained somewhat muted during the run-up to the sequel, it did not mean the anger didn't flow both ways.
And you've said that this is the first time you've heard Canelo say he's going to knock an opponent out.
Yes.
You've never heard him say that before.
Never.
Where do you think this change in the way he's speaking is coming from? You know, the animosity, the
I
dissatisfaction?
mean, it's obviously the animosity, the dissatisfaction, but just the fact that Golovkin is attacking Canelo's character, calling him a cheat. Canelo, he's had it. He's had it and he's fed up.
12 months of vilification and intense criticism made the Mexican's emotions profoundly visible.
Las Vegas, make some noise if you are ready!
Taking place in the familiar surroundings of Las Vegas and exactly 1 year on from the first fight, the two combatants picked up right where they left off. The intensity broiled right from the get-go. But where this fight differed from the first was Canelo's aggressiveness, seemingly with a point to prove whenever possible and taking the fight to Golovkin.
Good left hand, and look at the chin of Golovkin. He did no more than blink.
The Kazakh, for his part, opted to fight on the back foot behind a very active jab, before eventually finding a fresh burst of effort in the final rounds to close strong.
Left in front of Golovkin there. I'm sure there have been moments when he's been... Oh, good shot, Golovkin. Terrific right hand.
Both men treated a sellout crowd of 21,000 to a contest of extreme physical and psychological intensity that surpassed their first meeting. But this time round, there would be no judging conjecture to mar the moment. Instead, the agonizingly close scorecards were merely flecked by controversy, rather than being defined by it.
And the fight to linger in the memory. People are standing up cheering in all sides of the arena here in Las Vegas. They have appreciated every moment, and now the hatred, the enmity forgotten.
Decision and news.
After a year of debate and controversy, Saul Canelo Alvarez finally got the signature win of his career, the narrowest of points victories, which even his harshest detractors could find some semblance of respect in. The result of the second meeting would have a weighty impact on the trajectory of both careers. Golovkin, who many felt his best years were already dwindling before he even met Canelo, was confronted with the harsh reality that the gap between him and the competition was eerily closing in. His 36 years of age and cautious tactics in the second duel was a sharp contrast to the fresh, energetic attitude of the 28-year-old Mexican, whose victory and elevated status in the sport granted him the economical clout to pursue one of the most dominant runs of the past decade. A quick jump up to light heavyweight to capture the WBO title off the faded Sergey Kovalev made Canelo a three-weight world champion. But it would be his soaring 12-month campaign to capture all four titles at super middleweight that perfectly advertised his status as the premier name in boxing. One by one, the Mexicans swept aside each champion with absurd levels of skill and proficiency.
And it is over! They have stopped the fight!
Despite their bigger size and being in their primes, none were able to replicate the threat that Golovkin posed in his two fights. As such, Canelo faced little resistance and completed 2021 by becoming the undisputed super middleweight champion of the world.
Quite brilliantly, and Saul Alvarez becomes the undisputed world super middleweight champion.
His counterpart in the meantime remained at middleweight and became a unified champion once again by capturing the IBF and WBA titles vacated by his victor. Hopes of a third fight continued to evade him, as the resentful Canelo forged his own path in the higher weights. And the popular belief that the Kazakh's abilities at the highest levels were waning were most evident in his strenuous fight with Sergey Derevianchenko.
Good body shot.
Left to the body there, and Golovkin immediately backs up, and Derevianchenko looks for it again.
Despite his race against time, Golovkin would continue his attempts to goad Canelo into another fight.
Everybody knows I'm ready to September, I'm ready to Canelo, just bring him, just ask him, I'm ready. Today I stay here.
And due to the monetary benefits at play, the promoters, media and TV networks appeared just as keen. The boxing public, however, did not share the same enthusiasm. Instead, they preferred for the Mexican to set his sights on the light heavyweights, the only division capable of offering a worthy challenge. The two leading candidates were the formidable Russian pairing of Dmitry Bivol and Artur Beterbiev. And in an ambitious move to become undisputed at another weight division, Canelo opted to challenge the WBA light heavyweight champion. To the American side of the Atlantic, Dmitry Bivol appeared to be another impending victim of Canelo's hot run of form. But to the Europeans that were more familiar with the Russian's amateur pedigree, the WBA champion was a fleet-footed, dynamic boxer with a high fight IQ. And unbeknownst to the self-assured Canelo, would be the toughest opponent since Gennady Golovkin. But such was the confidence of Canelo and his promotional team that even the fight after Dmitry Bivol was already signed and agreed. The opponent? None other than Gennady Golovkin. And providing Canelo completed the formality of another victory, an announcement for the highly anticipated rubber match was due to be made in the ring immediately after. But if the opening rounds of his present fight were of any indication, those plans were carelessly premature. And it became immediately clear that Bivol was of a considerably different level to that of Canelo's recent opponents. Where the Mexican would ordinarily compensate the size disparity with skill and hand speed, Bivol instead defied the norms with his agile movement, quick combinations and expert control of distance. As such, Canelo failed to gain a foothold in the fight, and by the mid to late rounds, the Russian found a rhythm too difficult for the challenger to decipher. For 3 years, Saul Canelo Alvarez had effortlessly slid between 3 weight classes, collecting numerous titles along the way. But in his latest attempt to push the boundaries of greatness, audiences were reminded of his fallibility. And despite temptations to activate the rematch clause, Canelo was advised to drop back down to super middleweight and stick to the original plan of completing the trilogy against Gennady Golovkin.
Triple G has enjoyed a historically great run at middleweight, a generationally great rivalry with Canelo. Can he earn an opportunity to write another chapter with Canelo?
The Kazakh, for his part, put in a spirited display just a month prior against Ryota Murata, securing an entertaining stoppage victory.
Hard right hand from Golovkin, and Murata goes down. In comes the towel.
Though there were flashes of the old Golovkin, an air of vulnerability still remained. Nonetheless, it was a performance to recoup some of the interest that still existed for a third encounter with his long-term nemesis. And with Canelo shortly after suffering his first official defeat in 9 years, this developed the opportune moment to revive the trilogy.
It's the trilogy. Canelo Alvarez against Gennady Golovkin for the undisputed super middleweight championship of the world, September 17th.
Between two legends of the sport. This is a breathtaking matchup, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, fight in the sport of boxing, and we cannot wait to bring you this fight, an incredible show.
A Canelo versus Golovkin rubber match to complete a trilogy seems the only viable conclusion to an unforgettable rivalry whose 2 official results prior are still hotly contested to this day. 5 long years have passed since their first encounter, and many will justifiably reserve skepticism on the competitiveness of the matchup. But when sporting stars of this magnitude are involved, there develops an unyielding obligation to prove a point, particularly in a state of deep-seated dislike.
He pretends to be a nice guy, but in another place he talk a lot of shit. Just be a man and say what you say.
Maybe like a couple months ago, before May, he's completely different guy. After he doping scandal, he's come back, completely different guy. Just I don't understand why.
For Canelo Alvarez, the undisputed champion, it's the ideal moment to score a convincing result against an antagonist that he's become forever synonymous with. And for Gennady Golovkin, a grievance in which only an official victory can soothe the many transgressions taken place against him. Whatever the verdict on the night, the third encounter will represent the final moments of the division's most esteemed rivalry of the past 20 years. Two modern-day greats to close the chapter of their story, crossing over from boxing into general sporting folklore.